I knew Emily Hart wasn't coming back the morning her permit came across my desk, stamped approved. Not because we'd found her. We hadn't. Not because the dogs had quit at the washed-out bridge, though they would, later. I knew because the red date on the stamp was 3 days after she walked into the backcountry, and when I picked the paper up off the tray, the ink smeared under my thumb. It was still wet. I've been a backcountry ranger for going on 26 years. I'm not a dramatic man. Ask anyone in the district. I keep my logs neat, I file on time, I check my timestamps twice. That's the whole reason people call me careful, and I earned the word the hard way, and I'll get to that. But I need you to understand, before I tell you the rest, that I am not the kind of person who sees things. I don't believe in most of what people believe in. What I believe in is paper, a form filled out right, a stamp in the correct box, a record that agrees with itself. That's why this one broke me, because the paper was perfect, every line of it, and every line of it was a lie that the paper somehow made true. Let me start where it should start, which is before any of the strange part, back when it was just a permit denial and a girl I'd never met. Emily Hart was 17. She and her older cousin, Natalie, put in for an overnight backcountry permit in late September for a loop through the Pineglass area of our district, up over Hollow Bridge and around the shoulder of the ridge and back. It's a good loop, or it used to be. That summer we'd had a bad run of storms, and Hollow Bridge, an old timber footbridge over a deep creek gorge, had taken damage on the downstream footing. Our maintenance crew flagged it as unsafe in August. We closed the whole Pineglass Trail past the bridge until we could get an engineer up there, which, the way funding works, meant probably next spring. Closed means closed. Sign at the trailhead, gate on the access road. Closure noted in the permit system so it kicks back any application that routes through it. So when Emily and Natalie's application came in, the system did what it's supposed to do. It denied it. Route crosses closed segment, Hollow Bridge, Pineglass Trail. Denied. I didn't even handle it personally. Most denials are automatic. A girl at the front desk sent them the standard letter, offered them 3 alternate loops that don't touch the closure, and that was that. Routine. We deny a couple dozen permits a season for closures. Nobody remembers them. I only know the details now because afterward I read that file until I could recite it. I have Emily's original application in front of me as I tell you this. It's a photocopy. The original's in an evidence bag in a box I'm not supposed to have. On the trip plan section, where you're supposed to list your route and your camp, Emily wrote everything out in blue ballpoint in a careful, rounded hand. And in the margin, next to the line for Pineglass, she'd drawn a little star, just a small 5-pointed star, the kind a kid doodles. I found out later that was a habit of hers. She drew stars next to trail names she liked, trails she wanted to do. Her mother told me that, months on, at a point in this where I probably shouldn't have been talking to the family at all. And down at the bottom, below the signature line, in smaller writing, like a note to herself, she'd written, "First real solo hike someday." She was 17, and she was doing this loop with her cousin because she wasn't allowed to go alone yet, and she'd written herself a little promise about the future in the corner of a government form. That's the person we denied. That's the person whose permit came back approved after she was gone. Her father's name is Ron Hart. He's a plain-spoken man, works in HVAC, not the type to make a scene. When the denial came, he was disappointed for the girls, but he took it fine. He trusted us. That's the part that eats at me. He told me later, when everything was falling apart, that he'd actually used it as a lesson for Emily. See, he said he told her, "The rangers know that trail's not safe," so they said no, and that's them doing their job. And you listen when somebody who knows better says a place isn't safe. He was proud of the park for the denial. He held it up to his daughter as an example of adults being responsible. And then his daughter ended up on the far side of that closed bridge anyway, and no one, including me, has ever been able to tell him how. They went in on a Friday, not on the Pineglass Loop, or so everyone believed. After the denial, the cousins picked one of the alternate loops we'd suggested, the Cedar Bench Loop, which is a nice, easy overnight that stays well clear of the closure, on the other side of the drainage entirely. They got a permit for that one, no problem. Approved, properly, in the ordinary way, days before the trip, printed clean on the front desk laser printer. I have that permit too. There's nothing wrong with it. It's the most ordinary document in this whole file, and somehow that makes it sadder. They signed in at the Cedar Bench Trailhead Register at 9:12 Friday morning. Natalie's handwriting for both of them, but Emily added a small star next to her own name. They were due out Saturday evening. Natalie's mother expected a text when they hit the trailhead and had cell signal on the way home. The text never came. Saturday night went by. Sunday morning, the family called it in. We ran it standard. Their car was at the Cedar Bench lot, locked, nothing wrong. Register showed them signing in Friday, no sign out. So we had a start point, a planned route, and a timeline, which is more than you usually get, and we brought in teams and started working the Cedar Bench Loop, which is not big and not dangerous, and should have given up 2 lost girls inside a day. It gave up one. We found Natalie Hart on Sunday afternoon, alive, sitting on the ground beside an old gravel service road almost 2 miles off the Cedar Bench Loop, on the wrong side of a ridge she had no business being on. She was cold, mildly hypothermic, scraped up and confused in a way that wasn't just exposure. She kept asking where Emily was. She thought Emily was right behind her. She kept turning her head like she expected to see her cousin walk out of the trees. I wasn't the one who found her, but I was at the trailhead when they brought her out, and I heard her first account before anybody had a chance to lead her or muddy it. And here's the thing that should have told me right away this was going to be bad. Natalie's story didn't match the map. It didn't even match the mountain. She said they'd done Cedar Bench fine on Friday, camped fine, and started out Saturday. And then she said that Saturday afternoon they'd come to Hollow Bridge. There is no way to get to Hollow Bridge from the Cedar Bench Loop. Not in an afternoon. Not without crossing the whole drainage. Over terrain there's no trail through. It's on the other side of the district. I told her, gently, that she must be confused, that she meant a different bridge, and she got upset, because she knew Hollow Bridge. They'd wanted to do that loop. They'd been disappointed when it got denied. She knew exactly what bridge she meant. She said they came to Hollow Bridge and it was washed out, just like the letter said. And there was the closure sign, and they turned around. She was very clear about that. We turned around, she kept saying. We saw the sign and we turned around. I made us turn around. And then, she said, they were walking back, and at some point, Emily wasn't there anymore. That was Sunday. The strange part, the part I can't file, started Wednesday. 3 days after the last anyone could put Emily on solid ground, which by our reckoning was Saturday afternoon. I want to describe our office to you, because the ordinariness of it matters. The South District Records Office is one room off the back of the ranger station. Metal desks. A wall of filing cabinets, the old heavy kind. A permit printer that jams if the humidity's up. A coffee maker that has made bad coffee continuously since before I started. Coffee that tastes faintly of pennies, that nobody will replace, because replacing it would mean admitting somebody's in charge of it. There's an in-tray on the corner of the main desk where processed permits sit before they get filed. A beat-up plastic tray with processed, written on a strip of masking tape that's been there so long the marker's gone brown. Wednesday morning I came in early, the way I do, poured the penny coffee, and I was going through the tray, and there was a permit in it that shouldn't have been there. It was Emily and Natalie's original Pineglass application, the denied one. Same blue ballpoint, same careful rounded hand, same little star in the margin next to Pineglass, same first real solo hike someday down at the bottom. But it wasn't denied anymore. Across the top right corner, where our approval box is, there was a red stamp. Approved. Our stamp, the district stamp, the specific one with the little chip out of the D that Cortez has complained about for years. Below the stamp, a handwritten date, and below that, a signature. I read the date 3 times before it landed. It was the previous day's date, Tuesday. Emily had been missing since Saturday. The permit for a route she wasn't allowed on had been approved on a Tuesday, 3 days after she was already gone. I picked it up, and my thumb slid across the red ink and came away red. The stamp was wet. It had been stamped that morning, or the night before at the earliest. A stamp we hadn't used, on a permit we'd denied, dated impossibly, sitting in the tray in a locked office. And the signature. I knew handwriting the way some people know faces. It's a thing you get from 26 years of reading forms, and I didn't recognize this one, which was itself odd, because I know every signature in this district. So I did what I do. I went and pulled the old signature cards. The name on the permit was R. Vance. There had not been an R. Vance working in this district in my entire time here. I had to go all the way back into the archive, into the personnel cards from before my start date, and I found him. Raymond Vance. He'd been a permit officer and backcountry ranger in this district, and he had left, according to the card, 22 years before that Wednesday morning. The card didn't say fired or retired. It said, "In the neat block hand of whoever kept those cards back then, separated from service," and a date, and nothing else. I stood in the archive room with two pieces of paper, Emily's wet permit and Raymond Vance's 22-year-old personnel card, and I held them side by side, the signatures, and they matched. Same hard slant. Same way of crossing the T in Vance with a long stroke that ran back under the whole name like an underline. A man who had not worked here in over 2 decades had approved, yesterday, in wet ink, the permit of a girl who'd been missing since Saturday for a trail that was closed. I want to tell you I felt fear. What I felt first, mostly, was a kind of sick professional vertigo, the feeling you get when a thing you've trusted your whole career, the paper, the record, the process, does something it cannot do. Because if the record can lie like this, then everything I've ever signed my name to, every case I ever closed on the strength of a clean file, is standing on nothing. And I need to explain that, why that particular fear went straight to the bone with me, because it's the whole reason I couldn't let this go, the way another man might have. 11 years before Emily Hart, I closed a search too early. A man named Delaney went missing off a trail in the north end of the district. We searched hard for 9 days. On the 9th day, the weather turned. The incident commander was under pressure to release resources. And the paperwork, the search grids, the probability maps, all of it said we'd covered the ground, that if he was there, we'd have found him, that continuing was throwing good money after a recovery, not a rescue. I was the one who compiled that closing report. I signed off that the searchable area was exhausted. We suspended. They found Delaney the next spring, when the snow went off, in a section of a grid we had marked as cleared. He'd been alive for at least a few days after we suspended. He'd built a little shelter. He'd tried. And I had signed a piece of paper that said we'd looked where, it turned out, we had not actually looked, or had looked badly. And a man died waiting for people who'd already decided the file was closed. His family never forgave me, and they were right not to. His widow said one thing to me, at a hearing, that I have carried every day since. She said, "You closed him out on paper before you closed him out in the mountains." After that, I became the ranger I am now, the careful one, the one who won't sign a closure until every timestamp lines up, until every record agrees, until there are no loose threads sticking out of a file. Some of the younger ones think I'm slow, a stickler, a pain. Let them. I would rather be a pain than sign another lie. So you understand, when I picked up Emily Hart's permit and it was wet and impossible, and the date said we'd approved her into a place we'd told her father she'd never be allowed to go, 3 days after she vanished, it wasn't just strange to me. It was the exact shape of my worst mistake, turned inside out. Last time, the paper said we'd looked where we hadn't. This time the paper was saying she'd gone somewhere she couldn't have gone, and daring me to prove otherwise. I took the permit to Mara Ellis. Mara runs dispatch and handles our record systems, and she's been doing it long enough that she trusts the machines less than anybody in the building, which I've come to think is the correct amount. She has a chipped mug that says something on it that's worn off, and she drinks the penny coffee without complaint, which is its own kind of toughness. She has a dry way about her. When I put the permit on her desk and told her to look at the date, she looked, and she was quiet a second, and then she said, "Well, that's a hell of a turnaround time." But she wasn't joking. Not really. She touched the red ink, the way I had, and looked at her fingertip, and her face changed. "Okay," she said. "So somebody did this, last night or this morning. Somebody stamped a denied permit and backdated it and stuck it in your tray. That's what we're looking at. Somebody messing with us." She said it the way you say the reasonable explanation out loud to see if it holds up, and I could tell from her voice she was already hearing that it didn't. Because to have done that, somebody had to have gotten into a locked office, used a stamp that lived in a locked cabinet, pulled a denied permit out of the closed case files, and put it back in the active tray, overnight, and had a reason to sign it R. Vance, a name that meant nothing to anyone under 50 in this district. We spent that whole morning verifying, and I'll tell you what we found, because every piece of it made the reasonable explanation smaller. First, the system. Mara pulled the permit database. In the digital system, Emily and Natalie's Pineglass application still showed denied, correctly, with the closure reason, dated back in September. Good. Except there was now a second entry, a duplicate of the same application, showing approved, dated Tuesday, with an approving officer field that contained only initials, RV. There was no user account with those initials. There never had been. Mara pulled the login logs for the whole night, every account, and there was no login. Nobody had touched the system between 11 the night before and 6 that morning when the automated backup ran. The approved entry existed in the database, but the database's own record of who did what and when had no memory of it being created. The change was there. The act of changing it was not. Second, the printer. That physical permit had to come from somewhere. Hours print on the laser printer at the front desk. Mara checked the printer's job log. No jobs overnight. Then she checked the printer itself and pointed out, dryly, that it had been powered off since Friday afternoon because it had jammed and she'd shut it down to clear it and hadn't turned it back on. It was still off. Its screen was dark. She turned it on while I watched, and its job history came up, and the last job was Friday. So the permit in my hand had not come out of our printer, and it wasn't a fresh reprint anyway, I realized, holding it up to the light. It was the original, the physical original of the September application, in blue ballpoint, with a real star drawn by a real girl's hand. The paper had a soft, handled feel to it. This was the document that had been sitting in the denied permits file for a month. Somebody had taken the original out of the closed files and stamped it, which brought us to the stamp and to Cortez. Cortez is our maintenance ranger, but that title undersells him. He controls the physical stuff. keys, locks, supplies, and, importantly, the stamps. We have exactly 3 district approval stamps, and they live in a locked steel supply cabinet in the records office. And Cortez keeps the key, and Cortez keeps a log, a real log, a spiral notebook, of every time a stamp goes out and comes back, because years ago somebody lost one, and it became a whole thing, and Cortez decided it would never happen on his watch again. He is proud of that notebook, the way I'm proud of my closure reports, which is to say, defensively. I brought him the permit. He looked at it, and he looked at the chip in the D, and he said, "Flat. That's the number 2 stamp. That chip's the number 2 stamp." And then he got very quiet, and he went and unlocked the cabinet, and all 3 stamps were in it, in their little foam cutouts, including the number 2. And he picked it up and pressed it onto a scrap of paper, and there it was, the same chipped D, the same stamp that had marked Emily's permit. He checked his notebook. The number 2 stamp had not been signed out in over 5 months. The cabinet had been locked. He had the only key on him, on his belt, where it always was. He kept turning the stamp over in his hand, like it had bitten him. "Nobody had this," he said. "This didn't leave the cabinet. I'd stake my life." And then, quieter, because he's not a foolish man. "So how's it on that paper?" I didn't have an answer, but we had one more thing to check, and I almost didn't, because part of me already knew, and part of me wanted to keep not knowing. We had a camera in the records office. It's not fancy. It's a cheap security cam mounted in the corner that films the room and the file cabinets and the tray, put in years ago after some petty thefts of gear from the back. It films overnight to a little box. Mara pulled the footage from the night before. We watched the whole night at fast speed, the 2 of us leaning at her monitor, Cortez standing behind us with his arms crossed. Empty room, dark. The clock in the corner of the frame ticking through the hours. Nobody came in. The door didn't open. And at 2:17 in the morning, with no one in the room, the second drawer of the closed case filing cabinet, the one where the denied permits from that season were filed, slid open on its own. Not fast, slow. The way a drawer moves when a hand pulls it, except there was no hand. It slid open, and it stayed open for about 40 seconds, and then it slid shut. And the next morning the permit was in the tray, and none of us had seen it move there, because the footage between the drawer closing and dawn showed nothing but an empty room. And yet at some point in that empty room, the paper had made its way from the drawer to the tray. Mara ran the footage back and watched the drawer open again, and again. The 4th time she stopped it on the open drawer and just looked at it, and she said, "Not dry at all now. I've worked here 9 years. That drawer sticks. You have to pull it with both hands." She looked at me. "It does not slide." We didn't say much after that. There wasn't much to say that didn't sound insane. Cortez locked the stamp cabinet again, checked it twice, and went to change all the locks on the records office, which was reasonable, and which we all knew would not matter. Mara made a copy of the footage, and I bagged the permit, properly, as evidence, and logged it. And the whole time I was logging it, I was aware of how thin the ordinary act of logging felt, like doing paperwork on a house that's already on fire. But I'm a paper man, so I did the paper thing. And then I went to the field, because the paper said Emily had crossed a bridge that couldn't be crossed, and I had to see the bridge. Hollow Bridge is about a 40-minute drive up the closed access road, gate and all, and then a 2-mile walk in. I went the next morning, alone, which I shouldn't have, but I wanted to see it with nobody talking. It was cold and wet, that heavy autumn wet where everything drips and your boots soak through in the first quarter mile no matter what you wear. I walked in past the closure signs, which were intact, weathered, exactly where they should be, and I came out at the gorge. The bridge was gone. Not gone, but gone as a bridge. The far end had dropped when the footing failed. The timber decking sagged down into the gorge at a broken angle. The whole span twisted, the middle hanging over a 40-foot drop to the creek, which was running hard and brown with all the rain. You could not cross it. I want to be as plain as I can. A person could not have walked across that bridge. There was no bridge to walk across. To get to the far side, you'd have to go down into the gorge, cross the creek in flood, and climb the far wall. And there were no marks of anyone having done that. No scuffs on the mud banks, no snapped brush, nothing. The near side, where I stood, had my boot prints and the old prints of the maintenance crew from August, half melted by rain, and nothing between. And on the far side, tied to a broken trail marker post that leaned out over the gorge on the closed side, there was something pale, swinging a little in the wind. I glassed it with my binoculars. It was a plastic bag, a clear Ziploc, the kind hikers keep their phone or their matches dry in. And inside it was a small yellow and black cardboard box, and I knew what it was before I could really read it. A disposable camera. One of those cheap single-use film cameras, the kind you'd give a kid, the kind a 17-year-old on a budget might bring on a hike because it's fun, and it's cheap, and you don't cry if you lose it. It was on the far side, the impossible side. Tied there, dry in its bag, hanging over a gorge no one had crossed. I'm not proud of what I felt looking at it, which was a pull, a real, physical pull to find a way down and across and get it, because it was evidence, because it was hers, because it was right there. I stood on that near bank for a long time, working out whether I could get down safe and across, and the honest answer was no, not alone, not in that water. And the part of me that closed the Delaney file too early, the part that had learned the hard lesson, said, "You do not get yourself killed reaching for evidence. You come back with a team and a rope and you do it right." So I did the right thing. I marked it, photographed it from where I stood, logged the time and my position, and I hiked out to get help, and I hated every step. It took us 2 more days to recover that camera safely, with a technical team and an anchored line, and I won't bore you with the rigging. What matters is that when we finally got it, it was exactly what it looked like, a single-use film camera in a dry bag. The film counter on the little window read all the way used up, 27 of 27. And on the bag, in silver marker, in that same rounded hand, Emily had written her initials, E.H. We sent the film out to be developed. You can still get it done. There's a shop 2 towns over that does it for the nostalgia crowd. I asked them to rush it and to make me 2 sets of prints, and I drove out and picked them up myself. And I sat in my truck in the parking lot of that photo shop and went through them one at a time. And I want to tell you about these photos carefully, because they're the center of the whole thing, and because I've looked at them more than I've looked at almost anything in my life. The first several are ordinary, cheerful even. 2 girls on a hike. Natalie mugging for the camera at the cedar bench trailhead. Emily's boots. A chipmunk. Natalie pointing at a view. A selfie the 2 of them took with their heads together, laughing. The flash too bright. Both of them a little washed out. Camp. A fire. Emily's hand holding a marshmallow on a stick. Normal. Happy. A good trip. Then the photos change, and they change in a way that matches Natalie's impossible story instead of the map. There's a photo of a trail junction sign, and it's a Pineglass sign, not cedar bench. Pineglass. They were on the wrong trail, the closed one, somehow, despite everything. There's a photo of the closure notice. The yellow trail closed sign, photographed straight on, and you can see Emily's finger at the edge of the frame, like she was pointing at it, like she was documenting it. Look, it's really closed, just like they said. There's a photo of Hollow Bridge, the broken bridge, from the near side, the same view I'd had, the sagging span, the drop. And there's a photo, and this one I had to set down for a minute, of Natalie standing at the near end of the broken bridge with her back to the gorge, and she's got her hands up in a little helpless shrug, like, well, that's that. We turned around. She's smiling, but it's a rueful smile. It's the last photo of Natalie in the whole roll. And then the next photo is Emily. Alone, on the far side of the bridge. She's standing on the closed side, the impossible side, in the trees past the broken span. The angle is such that whoever took the photo was on the far side too, close to her. She's not smiling in this one. She's looking off to the side of the camera, at something out of frame, with an expression I've spent a long time trying to name, and the closest I can get is polite attention. Like someone who's been told to wait, and is waiting, and is listening to instructions. The light in the photo is different from the earlier ones, grayer, later in the day. There is no photo of Emily crossing. The roll goes from Natalie shrugging on the near side to Emily standing on the far side, and there is nothing in between, no photo of the crossing, no photo that explains it, just the near side and then the far side, like a page torn out of the middle of a sentence. And behind Emily, in that photo tied to a tree, there's a strip of red. I got a lupe, one of those little magnifying eyepieces, and I went over that part of the print until my eyes ached. And it's a red permit tag. We use them in the field sometimes, the little tear-off tags you tie to a pack or a tent, so a patrolling ranger can see at a glance that a party's permitted. It's tied to a tree behind Emily's shoulder, and there's writing on it, and even blown up it's too small to read most of it, but the date is on a line by itself in bigger figures, and I could read the date, and the date was 2 weeks in the future from when that photo could possibly have been taken. A permit tag on the closed side with a date that hadn't happened yet, tied to a tree behind a girl who couldn't have gotten there. The last several photos on the roll are dark. Not black, but dim, dusk, or later, and they're hard to make out. And they're all of the same thing from slightly different angles. It took me a while to understand what I was looking at because it's such an ordinary thing to find at the bottom of a nightmare. They're photos of a counter. A wooden counter, like an old ranger station front desk, with a hanging lantern throwing yellow light. And on the counter there's an open ledger and a stamp and an ink pad, and a hand reaching in from the side of the frame toward the stamp. Just a hand and a cuff, a dark sleeve. And the last photo, 27 of 27, is the ledger. Close up, open to a page, and on the page there are lines of names, and the light's bad and the film's cheap, but at the bottom of the page, freshest, you can make out E. Hart, and beside it, in a different hand, 2 words I could just read: approved and after. Approved after. I didn't understand it yet, not fully, but I felt it, sitting in that truck, the shape of it starting to come clear, the way you feel the shape of a word before you can say it. I went back and interviewed Natalie again. She was home by then, recovering, but not well. She'd stopped sleeping. Her mother sat in on it, which was fine. I didn't show her the far side photo first. I let her tell it again, and she told it the same. They came to the bridge. It was out. She made them turn around, and then Emily wasn't there. And I asked her, as easy as I could, whether there was anything she remembered from the bridge that she hadn't said before. Anything Emily said. And she got quiet, and her mother took her hand, and Natalie said, in a small voice, that there was one thing, and she hadn't said it because it didn't make sense, and she thought she'd imagined it. She said that at the bridge, when they were standing there looking at the closure sign, Emily said something odd. Emily was looking at the sign and at the broken bridge, and she said, kind of dreamy, kind of like she was answering a question nobody had asked. Maybe it's already approved. Natalie said she'd asked Emily what she meant, and Emily didn't answer, and then Natalie was busy turning them around, getting them going back, and when she looked again, Emily was a little behind her, and then a little more behind, and then, she doesn't know. She was walking and talking to Emily, and at some point Emily stopped answering, and when she turned around, the trail was empty. Then I showed her the far side photo. Emily alone, on the closed side, the red tag behind her. Natalie looked at it, and she made a sound I don't want to describe, and she pushed it away, and she said, no, that's wrong. She was with me. She was behind me on our side. And then she was crying and shaking her head, and through it she said one more thing that I wrote down word for word. She said, I kept hearing a stamp. I asked her what she meant. She said that the whole time they were walking back, the whole time, she kept hearing a sound in the woods, off to the side, keeping pace with them, and it was a stamp, an office stamp. That hard double sound, the press and the lift, The ka-chunk of a rubber stamp hitting an ink pad and then hitting paper, over and over, out in the trees, where there is no office and no paper. She said she told herself it was a woodpecker. She said she knew it wasn't a woodpecker. A woodpecker doesn't hit an ink pad first. I need to tell you about Dale now because after the photos and Natalie, I did what I should have done sooner, which is go to the one person in the district older than me. Dale Mercer is our senior ranger, a year or two from retirement, a quiet man who's forgotten more district history than the rest of us will ever learn. I laid it all out for him in his office, the permit, the signature, the drawer at 217, the camera on the far side, the tag with the future date, the ledger, approved after. And Dale listened to the whole thing without a word, and when I finished, he didn't tell me I was tired or that there was an explanation. He got up and he shut his door, which I'd never seen him do, and he sat back down and he said, "I was hoping I'd be gone before it came around again." He went to his own filing cabinet, not the official one, a personal one, and he unlocked the bottom drawer, and he took out a folder that was soft and gray with age and handling, and he laid 3 files on the desk. The first was from 1997, a closed route. A rock slide that year had shut a canyon trail. A hiker, a young man, denied a permit through it because of the closure, went missing off a different, open trail, was never found, and weeks after he vanished, his denied permit turned up approved, stamped, backdated, filed. Dale had a photocopy. The approving signature was R. Vance, and in the notation field, in that same second hand, it said, "Approved after arrival." The second was from 2004. Different closure. A bridge again. A different bridge in a different part of the district that they'd since torn out entirely. A woman, denied, missing, never found. Permit surfaced approved 8 days after her disappearance. Same signature, same notation. Approved after arrival. The third was 2013. A father this time, on a permit he'd been denied for a closed high route in a bad snow year. Missing. Permit came back approved 11 days later. R. Vance. Approved after arrival. 3 cases, spread across 16 years, plus now Emily. 4 that Dale knew of. All the same, a closed way, a denied permit, a person gone somewhere they could not have reached, and then, days later, the permit turning up approved and backdated, signed by a man who separated from service in this district long before most of it happened, with the same 2-word notation every time. I asked Dale who Raymond Vance was. Dale was quiet for a while. He said Vance was before his time too, mostly, but that the old-timers, the ones who trained Dale, had known him, and they hadn't liked to talk about him. What Dale had pieced together, over the years, from those men, was this. Vance had been the district's permit officer back in a period when they were closing a lot of old routes, old trails and camps from the earliest days of the park that were being decommissioned, taken off the maps, sealed up. It had been Vance's job to process all that, to deny the permits for the closed ways, To be the man who told people no, this route no longer exists. You cannot go there. And the story, the part the old men would only say sideways, was that Vance came to believe that the routes weren't really closed, that you couldn't close a trail just by taking it off a map and hanging a sign, that the way was still there and still went somewhere, and that the paperwork was the only thing pretending otherwise. Dale said one of his mentors told him that toward the end, Vance stopped denying permits for the closed routes and started, quietly, approving them, backdating them, so that on paper the people had gone where the map said they couldn't. Like he was trying to make the record honest, like he thought the record was the thing that was lying, not the mountain. They separated him from service. And that, Dale said, was where the men would stop talking. Separated from service. Not fired, not retired. Nobody would say what happened to Vance after that. One of them, once, drunk, told Dale that Vance had gone up one of his own closed routes to prove it still went somewhere, and had done exactly that, proved it, and never came back down. And that ever since, whenever the district closes a way and denies someone through it, and that someone ends up on the far side anyway, the permit comes back approved, in Vance's hand, because as far as Vance is concerned, or whatever's left doing Vance's job, they went where the record now says they went, and the record just needed to catch up. The permit doesn't approve where you're allowed to go, Dale said. It approves where the closed way has already decided you'll end up. The stamp comes after, because the arrival comes first. That's what approved after arrival means. You arrive, on the far side, in the place that isn't supposed to exist, and then the paperwork gets made honest. I asked Dale why he'd never told anyone, why it was in a personal drawer and not in the record. And he looked at me and he said, "Because who do I tell? And in what field, on what form?" And I understood that God helped me, because it was the same wall I'd been hitting for days. There is no box on any form for what was happening. The whole horror of it was that it lived entirely in the record and could not be recorded. While Dale and I were sitting with those old files, the search for Emily was still going, and it was going wrong out in the field, in the same way everything else was going wrong. Foley was running a search grid, C9, that covered the drainage below and around Hollow Bridge, on our side, the near side, because that was the last place we could put Emily on ground that existed. Foley's a good field ranger, practical, not imaginative, which is exactly who you want. And his radio calls that week got stranger and stranger, and I have the dispatch log because Mara logs everything. First, his GPS units started drifting, all of them, the same direction, toward the gorge, toward the bridge. His team would set a bearing to sweep a section of grid away from the creek and come out closer to the creek than they'd started. Then they started finding flagging tape they hadn't tied. Orange flagging, our color, tied off in good knots on branches through their grid, marking a line that led toward the bridge. And when Foley looked close at the flagging, it wasn't blank. Somebody had stamped it. Little red marks along the tape, faint. And when he brought a piece back and I looked at it under the loop, it was the approval stamp, the chipped D. Someone something, had run our number 2 stamp down a length of orange flagging tape and tied it through the woods to lead the searchers to the bridge. And then, on the 4th day, Foley called in, and his voice was different, and the log has it time-stamped. He said his team could hear a girl calling. From the far side of the creek, from the closed side. A girl's voice, he said, calling out, the way a lost person calls. And it sounded like it was saying help. And it sounded young. And one of his team, a woman named Reyes, was sure it was saying a name, and the name it was saying was theirs, calling to them by the team, come over, come across. Foley wanted to cross. You could hear it in his voice on the radio. The pull, the same pull I'd felt looking at the camera. There was a missing 17-year-old girl's voice coming from across a creek, and every instinct a searcher has says you go to that voice. You go now. And I was at the dispatch console with Mara, and I keyed the mic, and I gave Foley a direct order not to cross, not to go down into the gorge, not to find a way over, not for any reason, to hold his team on the near side and pull them back from the water. He argued. On an open channel, which he never does. He said, there's a girl over there, and I said, I know, and I made it an order anyway. And Foley took it, because he's a good ranger, but before he clicked off you could hear it. Low, not quite to himself, the recorder caught it. This is wrong. We don't leave a voice. And he was right, and I was right, and I have not been able to make those two things sit together since. 10 minutes after Foley pulled his team back, a piece of flagging tape turned up tied to the dispatch antenna outside the station, on the near side of everything. In the parking lot, stamped red, all down its length. Nobody saw it get there. The next thing that happened, I almost didn't include, because it's the piece that makes people stop believing me. But it's in the evidence log, so I'll tell it. There's an old trailhead at the far north edge of the district, a decommissioned one, from the days when there were more ways in, and there's still a permit box bolted to a post there. A battered metal box where hikers used to deposit their self-issue slips. It's been locked and empty for years. A volunteer doing trail work up that way found it standing open, the lock hanging broken, and inside, a single fresh permit slip. It was in Emily's handwriting, the rounded hand, the stars. It was a self-issue backcountry slip, the kind you fill out and drop in the box, and it was dated 4 days after she vanished, and it was filled out completely and correctly. Party of 1, Emily Hart. And in the destination line, where you write your camp, she'd written the name of a campsite, and she'd drawn a little star next to it, the way she did for places she liked. The campsite she'd written did not exist, or rather, it had existed. Mara and I ran the name, and it took us into the oldest archive maps, the pre-decommission maps, the ones from before Vance's purge of the old ways. It was one of the original backcountry camps, up past Pineglass, deep in the closed area, and it had been struck from the maps decades ago, sealed and abandoned. No trail to it anymore. Nothing. Emily had checked in, on paper, 4 days after she vanished, at a campsite that had been erased from the world before she was born, and she'd drawn a little star beside it, like she was glad to be there. That's when Dale and I decided to walk in toward the old camp, not to cross the bridge. There's another way toward the Pineglass closed area, a longer, brutal bushwhack from the north that doesn't require the bridge, that Dale knew from the old days. We told Mara our route and our turnaround time, and we went in, the two of us, two old men, going up into a place that had been closed longer than the young rangers had been alive. There was no trail. Dale navigated from memory and from the old maps. And after about an hour, we started finding the tags. Red permit tags, tied to branches, one every 100 yards or so, leading forward, deeper in, toward where the old camp should be, leading us. And each one had a date on it, and the dates were all different, and I recognized some of them. One tag's date was the day the man from 1997 went missing. One was 2004. One was 2013. Each closed case. Each person the mountain had approved after arrival had a tag on that route with their date on it, like markers on a road, like mileposts counting off the people who'd walked in and not out. And near the end, before dusk started coming down, and Dale said we had to turn back or we'd be out there in the dark, we found one more tag, newer than the rest, the paper still bright, and it had my name on it, my full name, in a hand I didn't know. And where the date should be, it was blank, just a line, waiting. We turned around. We did not reach the camp. We came out in the last light, with our legs shaking, and neither of us said much. And that night, at dusk, back at the station, the radio brought us Emily. I was in dispatch with Mara. It came over the field net, weak but clear, a girl's voice, calm, polite, a little cold-sounding, the voice of a tired kid being well-mannered with an adult. It said, "This is Emily Hart. I'm here for my permit. They said I was expected." And then, after a pause, a little uncertain, the way a kid checks she's doing it right. Am I in the right place? Mara had gone white. She was already working her console. And she looked at me and she said, in a voice I'd never heard from her, "That's not coming from the field." She turned her screen. The transmission wasn't originating from any field radio, any repeater, any handheld out in the search area. It was originating, according to every locating tool she had, from inside our own building, from the closed permit office down the hall. Emily Hart was checking in for her permit, politely, from a locked office 30 feet away, and when I went and opened that office, it was empty and dark and cold, and the radio in there was off, unplugged, its cord wrapped around it on the shelf where it had sat for a year. Emily's father came to the station the next day, Ron. He'd heard we'd scaled back the field search, that we were calling it, moving to what we call limited continuous, which is the phrase we use when we've stopped really looking and won't say so. And he was not the calm, trusting man who'd used our denial as a lesson for his daughter. He was wrecked, and he was furious, and he stood in our front office and he asked me the question I have never been able to answer. He said, "If you denied the permit because that place wasn't safe, if you knew If the system knew, then how is my daughter in there? You kept her out on paper. You told me you kept her out, and she's in there. So which is it? Did you keep her out, or didn't you? And if the paper was wrong about keeping her out, what else is the paper wrong about, and why did you stop looking? Every word of it was the Delaney widow's voice coming back to me across 11 years. You closed him out on paper before you closed him out in the mountains. I could not tell Ron Hart the truth, because the truth was insane and unfileable and would have sounded like cruelty. And I could not give him a lie, because I am the man who does not sign lies anymore. So I stood there and I gave him almost nothing, and he left believing I was hiding something. And he was right. I was. And I couldn't have told him if I'd wanted to. That's what pushed me to do the last thing. I decided to spend the night in the records office and see for myself. I told Mara. She didn't like it. She stayed on the radio from dispatch, in the building, so I wasn't fully alone, and we kept a channel open. I sat in the dark records office with a chair against the wall so I could see the whole room, the file cabinets, the tray, the locked stamp cabinet, my flashlight off, my notebook in my lap, writing down the time every so often just to have something to hold on to. The penny coffee smell, the tick of the clock, wet boots because it was raining again and I hadn't changed them. Ordinary things. I held on to the ordinary things. At 2:17 in the morning, the stamp cabinet clicked. Not opened, just clicked. The sound of the lock turning, though the lock was locked, and Cortez had the only key, and Cortez was home in bed. It clicked, and the cabinet door swung open a few inches on its own, and I did not move. I sat with my back against the wall and I watched, and in the dim light coming through the blinds from the parking lot lamps, the number 2 stamp lifted, or seemed to lift, and was on the desk. I hadn't seen it cross the room. It was just on the desk now, by the ink pad, the way the hand in Emily's last photos reached for it. And a blank permit form was on the desk too, that hadn't been there. And as I watched, holding my breath, holding the arms of the chair, writing appeared on it. Not a hand writing it. The writing simply came, line by line, in that same hard slanted hand from the old signature card, filling in the form the way frost fills a window. It filled in the applicant name, and the name was mine. It filled in the route. Hollow Bridge to Pineglass closed area, and the old campsite, the sealed one, the one with Emily's star. And it filled in the status line, and the status line said, pending arrival, pending arrival, not approved, not yet, pending, waiting on me to go, waiting on me to walk up that closed route to save a girl whose voice was checking in from down the hall, so that once I arrived on the far side, in the place that isn't supposed to exist, the stamp could come down and make it approved after arrival, and there'd be a new tag on the route with my name, and, finally, a date. That was the moment I understood the whole shape of it, sitting in the dark with my heart going. The voice, the drifting GPS, the stamped flagging leading to the bridge, Emily calling from the far side, help, come across, We don't leave a voice. It was all bait, not cruel bait. That was almost the worst part. It wasn't malicious. It was procedural. The closed way processes people. It expects you to end up on the far side, and it uses the one thing a ranger cannot ignore: a lost child's voice, a rescue, your own duty and decency, to get you to walk into the place where the record can be made honest. My whole life, everything good in me, my care, my refusal to leave a case unfinished, my need to never again close a file on someone who was still out there, all of it was exactly the hook. The better a ranger you are, the more surely you go. I keyed the radio. I told Mara what I was seeing. My voice was not steady. She said, "Quiet. Don't go up there. Whatever it's telling you, please." And I said I wasn't going to. And I meant it, mostly. But there was a part of me that wanted to, that heard Emily's polite, cold voice saying, "Am I in the right place?" and wanted to go tell her, "Yes, sweetheart, I'll help you." That wanted to go find her and bring her home the way I couldn't bring Delaney home. And that part of me is the part the whole thing was built to catch. I did not touch the paper. I sat in that chair until the gray came up in the window, and at dawn the cabinet was shut and locked, and the stamp was in its foam, and the blank permit with my name on it was gone, and I could almost have believed I dreamed it, except my notebook had every timestamp in my own handwriting, and my hands still would not quite stop shaking. But I had to go to the bridge one more time, not to cross. I need to be as clear about that as a man can be, because it's the only thing I did right, and it's the thread I'm hanging the rest of my life on. I went back to Hollow Bridge at dusk the next day, alone again, against sense, because I had to stand there and refuse it to its face. I had to close this by not closing it, if that makes any sense at all. I stood on the near side. The broken bridge sagged into the gorge. The creek ran hard below, and on the far side, in the trees past the drop, there was light. A warm, low, yellow light. A lantern. The lantern from Emily's last photos, sitting on the closed side where no lantern could be, and no one could have carried one. And in the lantern light I could see the corner of something, a counter maybe, a post, I couldn't tell, and I could hear, faint over the creek, Emily's voice, and she sounded happier now. She sounded relieved. She said, "I got my permit. It's all approved." And then she said, "You're expected. They saved you a spot. Just come across and check in." And tied to the broken rail of the bridge, on my side, close enough that I could have reached it, there was a red paper permit. My permit. The one that had written itself in the night. It was tied there fluttering, and the applicant name was mine, and the route was the closed route, and the status line still said pending, and above the approval box, held in the air over the paper by nothing, waiting, was the stamp, the number 2 stamp with the chipped D, hanging there over the box, waiting for me to walk out onto that bridge, to accept the route, to arrive, so it could come down. I took out my notebook. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely write, and I wrote, in pen, pressing hard so it couldn't be smoothed away, did not cross, did not accept route, remained on near side, and the time, and my name, my real signature, the one that's really mine, the one I've signed to True Things for 26 years. And then I backed away from that bridge, off the closed road, past the intact closure signs, to my truck, with the light and the voice and my own waiting permit behind me, and I drove down out of there, and I did not go back. Emily Hart was never found. The official report attributes her disappearance to exposure and disorientation in difficult terrain, following an apparent unauthorized entry into a closed area. Cause and manner undetermined. Recovery pending. I wrote that report. I chose every word of it. It is careful, and it is technically true, and it is a lie by omission so large it makes me sick, and it is the only report I could file, because there is no form with a box for what took her. I signed it. I hated signing it more than I've ever hated anything with my name on it, more even than the Delaney closure, because at least the Delaney lie was a mistake, and this one I told on purpose. Natalie Hart never got her memory back all the way. She carries the bridge and the stamping sound in the woods, and a hole where her cousin should be, and I don't think she'll ever fully be free of it. Ron Hart never forgave the park, and he never forgave me, and he's right on both counts, and I've stopped hoping he won't be. I transferred out that winter, requested a district in flat, dry country a long way from any closed trail or washed-out bridge, and got it, and I've been there since. I keep my own log now, every day, in pen, where I was, what I did, in my own true hand, because I've learned that a record is not the safe, honest thing I spent my life believing it was, and the only defense I have is to keep making true ones and refuse to accept false ones. It's not much, it's what I've got. Months after I transferred, an envelope came, forwarded from the old station, and a note from Mara clipped to what was inside. The note said just, "This came off the front desk printer last week. I've had it powered off and unplugged since you left. I checked. It's still unplugged. I didn't know if you'd want it, but I couldn't be the only one who'd seen it." Inside was a single permit slip. It was for me. My name, my old badge number, correct. The route was Hollow Bridge to the Pineglass closed area, to the old sealed camp with the star. The approval box was empty. Just one line was filled in, at the bottom, in red ink, in that hard, slanted hand, and beside it, when I tilted the paper to the light, the ink caught wet, still wet, months later and 100 miles away, on a page that came out of a printer with no power. The line said, "Approved after arrival." So here's the only thing I have to give you, in case it's ever any use, in case you ever find yourself in a place like the one I was in. If someone goes missing off a closed way, and then their permit comes back approved, dated after they were already gone, do not do what every good instinct in you will scream to do. Do not go up the closed route to prove the record wrong. Do not follow the tags. Do not go to the voice, no matter whose it is, no matter how young it sounds, no matter how much it needs you. That's the bait. And the better a person you are, the better it works. The record is not describing where the missing person went. It is describing where you are expected to end up. The approval is not a mistake in the file. It is an invitation, and it is patient, and it does not need you to believe in it. It only needs you to arrive. Stay on the near side. Write down that you stayed. Keep the paper you can trust. And if the red stamp is still wet, do not touch the paper.